Okay, and we're live. Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. For those new here, my name's Nicki, and I post videos here on YouTube about writing, editing, reading, and all the other things I love. And it's reading we're here for today because it's the end of the month, so it's time to share what books I've been reading during November. So I will kick us straight off. Let me get rid of the banner. There we go. Okay, so first of all, I've only read about 10 or 11 books this month because I've read a few big ones. And we'll start off with two of those because I recently received from Pat Macmillan Australia review copies of the first four books in the A Chorus of Dragons series by Jenn Lyons. So the first one I read back in October, and I've just finished 2 and 3 this month. So I've just got 4, which I'm going to be starting hopefully this week in the next couple of days. So basically books, it's an epic fantasy story, essentially. When I got to book 2, The Name of All Things, I was a bit put off at first by the change in narration because we had completely different narrators than the previous time. And it did take me maybe 150 pages or so. I mean, I'm talking out of a 600-page book to get into the story again with these new narrators. But once I did, I enjoyed it once more. And that led us on to The Memory of Souls, which I've literally just finished today. And that one had a mix of a narration. So we went back to some bits from the first narrator, some bits from the narrators in the second book, plus some new narration. And now I've gotten used to that style. I really enjoyed it. And the story overall is appealing. I'm invested in what's going on and in the characters. So I'm interested to see what the fourth book will bring. And I believe there is going to be a fifth and final book next year. So I gave The Name of All Things 4 stars and The Memory of Souls 4.5. So we'll see next month what I give to The House of Always. So moving along to a book I received from NetGalley, and that is The Witch Collector by Charissa Weeks. And this was a 4.5-star read for me. This is another fantasy tale about magic and various races that are battling it out. And our main character, she has a grudge against the Witch Collector of the title and plans to kill him. But when their village is attacked by a third party on that same day that she's made those plans, they end up having to work together and save each other. And she begins to realize that perhaps he's not quite what she thought he was. So there's a romance element going on there as well. This was a great fantasy story. I liked the world building. The characters were really engaging and memorable. And I'm definitely interested to see what will happen next in the story as the series continues. Another book I received from Pat Macmillan Australia was Devotion by Hannah Kent. I've read both Hannah Kent's previous novels, Burial Rites and The Good People. And I have to say Burial Rites, the first one, remains my favourite. I've not disliked any of her books, but for me, Burial Rites was just one step above everything else. And Devotion, I gave 4 stars too. It was an interesting story, heavily religious, which perhaps put me off a little bit. Still an interesting story, interesting characters, but for me, it didn't have that impact that Burial Rites did that made me think about it for a long time after I'd read it. It was well written, it was interesting, but perhaps the subject matter didn't appeal to me quite so much as Burial Rites did, I would say. Next up, I read The Might by Siri Pettersen, and this was from NetGalley, and it was the final book in a trilogy, again, fantasy. I gave this 4.5 stars. So we pick up pretty much directly after book 2 left off. And I thought this third book nicely wrapped up all the story arcs that had started through books 1 and 2. It was a satisfying ending. There was plenty of action and adventure still. And I also enjoyed the way the sort of character relationships wound up as well. And sticking with NetGalley, I also read Mrs. Death by Salena Godden. This was a 3-star read for me. The premise of this book is someone has met Death. Death is a woman, and he has sort of been hearing her story, and he's put some of it down on the page. So it was really a kind of treatise or series of thoughts on death and loss and the grieving process. And from that point of view, it was interesting. But to me, it was just a little bit too disjointed. I wasn't quite sure how it was supposed to have come together. There were interesting bits, but as a whole, it didn't quite work for me, which is why I gave it 3 stars. But if it's something that sounds interesting to you, then do check it out. Next up is a book I bought, which is The Story of Marvel Studios by Bennett and Terry. And this book has a long, long history, because this was originally supposed to release as, you know, the first 10 years of Marvel Studios back in 2019. And when I first saw it listed, I was interested in it, and I very nearly pre-ordered it. And I'm really glad I didn't, because the release date has been pushed back and pushed back and pushed back. Every time a new date was released and I thought, oh, maybe I'll pre-order it now, I held off, and then luckily I did, because it was pushed back another 6 months. And then the title changed and it became The Story of Marvel Studios. And so when I saw it a few months ago listed again, but this time with accompanying pictures of the inside of the book, I thought, well, it looks like it's close enough to completion now that I can risk pre-ordering. So I did. And it was worth the 2-year wait. It's a 5-star read for me. This book has just tons and tons of behind the scenes photos and stories, looking at the creation of the Marvel movies, going right back to Iron Man and then leading up to the end of the last phase with Endgame and the Spider-Man that came just after that. So if you're a Marvel fan, it's really worth having. It's beautifully presented in these huge, this sort of size hardback books in a nice presentation folder. So if you love Marvel, it's definitely worth taking a look at. And then jumping back to NetGalley for the last 4 books I read. The first of those was The Georgians by Penelope J. Corfield. So this is a non-fiction history book. I gave it 4.5 stars. I've read a lot of books about the Georgians, but what I enjoyed about this one was the focus was on how the Georgians themselves in the contemporary period viewed things that were happening in their world. So I quite liked that as the focus, rather than most books which look at how we view it from a modern perspective of what was going on. But she's really looked into contemporary sources, diaries, letters, and things like that, to see how people thought about these things at the time. And I thought that was a really fresh and interesting approach. The next book I read was The Colour of the Sky is the Shape of a Heart by Chesil. So this is a Korean story about a teenage girl who grows up as a Korean person in Japan and later in America as well. And so it focuses on ideas of a sense of belonging, fitting in and things like that. I gave it 4 stars. I thought it covered some really interesting themes in a very sensitive way. And this is aimed at teens, and I thought it's compared in the blurb to Pachinko and a couple of other books, but I feel that that's a bit misleading, because, I mean, Pachinko is a huge adult epic drama, whereas this is a much more condensed version. And as I said, it's aimed at teens, and I think that at that level it does a similar thing, yes, but if you go into it expecting it to be like Pachinko, it's not quite. So I think that's maybe a bit of a mistake on the promotional side of things, but it was a really heartwarming, heartfelt story, and it definitely held my interest from start to finish. Next up, I read This World Does Not Belong to Us by Natalie Garciá Freire. So this is a book that I gave, what did I give it? I think I've managed not to write in my book here what I gave it. In fact, I should just jump on and check, because I've got a feeling it was either 3 or 3.5. Let me just open up my blog and I can tell us, because I only read it quite recently. Let's jump back a bit. Here we go. Okay, yes, 3.5 is what I gave it in the end. For me, this is a very lyrical novel, or novella, really. It was quite short. It touches on themes such as death, family relationships, and the connection with nature, and the role of religious belief. It has a lot to say, but now and then I kind of wish the book was longer because I felt it was in some ways too condensed. I wanted to get to know the characters and the story a bit more than we did, which is why it was a 3.5-star read for me. But it is, as I said, a very lyrical and emotional piece. So it's worth checking out if that sounds like your kind of thing. And the last book I read for November was A Good Year by Polis Loizou. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing that, which I probably am. This is, again, a very short piece, a novella length piece. And it's a kind of emotional drama that blends the drama with a kind of gothic folklore, if you like. This was a 4-star read for me. I thought the blending of the folklore with the story was quite interesting, and it's kind of left up to the reader to decide whether the folklore elements are real or metaphor. I interpreted them as metaphor, but this is a story set in Cyprus in the 1920s, and it covers things like a father and sort of soon-to-be father who's struggling with his homosexual attraction to an Englishman who's moved into the area. Meanwhile, his heavily pregnant wife is trying to cope with, the strange way he's behaving, while she's trying to also deal with being pregnant and her worries about the future for her child. So it had a lot going on, and as I said, it was 4 stars for me. It was a really nicely crafted emotional drama with a folklore aspect. So that brings us to the end of everything I've read during November. As I said, I'm about to start the last currently available book in that fantasy series, and these are all big books of like 600 odd pages each. So that's why I haven't read quite as many as usual in November, but I've got that one to go, and then I've got one also big 600-page NetGalley one, as well as 2 shorter NetGalley ones, which I'll be getting onto afterwards. So I'm hoping my Goodreads goal, I think I'm at about 172 now out of 180. So hopefully I can just squeeze over the finish line by the end of December with that. But I will be back again at the end of next month. As I've said previously, the December live streams for my reading and TV and film wrap-ups will be the last ones. And I'm moving my reviews just to my blog and Instagram as of next year, just because people are not really watching these very much. So it's probably not worth the effort of producing them. So I will be back again during December, though. I have a couple of pre-filmed vlogs for you. Plus, I'll be doing my middle of the month live stream language learning vlog. And then at the end of the month, I will do the final live streams for the books I've read and the TV and film I've watched. And I'll probably also do a bit of a live stream, just a short one, just to explain what my plans are for my YouTube channel moving through into 2022, because I am winding it back a little bit. I'm still going to be posting some stuff, but it's not going to be as much as before, because I just feel it's not getting the watches that make it worthwhile doing the content, if you see what I mean. I'd rather put my efforts into Instagram and my blog. So I will explain all that at the end of the month, but I will leave you there for now. Bye, everyone.